All right, boys, welcome back. Really excited to be sharing our new magician, or at least a magician for this segment. Pratik and I are joined in the lab by Charles McElwee, who is the editor of RealClear Pennsylvania, that company that many of you just constantly bitch and complain about their polling averages. That company that all of us woke up in the morning for like 10 consecutive years reading every article on their homepage. Charles, I don't know if you ordinarily feel like a celebrity, but in the world of degeneracy, I think you do qualify as one. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, but can you talk about, like, do you feel like there's a burden on your shoulders as a celebrity here?
I'll get through it.
You'll manage.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Pratik, you're here too. Do you want to say hello?
Yeah, and I want to say, in addition to Charles's current role, he is, if you don't know, a very distinguished writer. The thing that Charles always stood out to me about your writing is I think you've been very much in tune over the last few years of kind of upper middle class politics, cultural anxieties, and so forth. So I think you write for Manhattan Institute, American Conservative, number of other places. So check it out for sure.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. Yes, I try to look for those overlooked trends.
Well, I do see some restoration hardware behind you, so I think you fit in well with your demographic out in, what are you, like Montgomery County, or where like somewhere in Metro Philadelphia?
I'm in this no man's land territory. Like, you take a few steps, you're in Chester, a few steps, you're in Montgomery, and then Delaware. So I'm in Wayne, so basically Radnor Township, about 20 minutes west of Center City, Philadelphia.
Okay. All right. Well, then we're going to call you a mainliner, and I'm going to ask you if I have the right loafers or something.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, so we're not here to talk about wingtip loafers in mainline Philadelphia. We're here to talk about this absolutely indecipherable, fascinating, exciting Republican primary. So, Charles, I warned you that you were going to be sort of the star witness and the expert, but I was hoping you could let me take my best guess at summarizing who these candidates are by analogy, and maybe you can tell me if I've got it right or I've got it wrong.
Go for it.
All right. So I guess I'm just going to go in order of my own personal interest, and you can order them yourself. So, Charles, the first on my list I have is David McCormick. And in my mind, David McCormick is like the Glenn Youngkin billionaire savior complex for Republicans in Pennsylvania that voters may or may not want. Is that, I don't know, would you describe him differently?
No, that seems about right. He wants to follow the Youngkin playbook, a guy who can carry the Trump message to working class voters while also being unthreatening to suburban voters. And I will say, even where I am in Radnor Township, it appears to be working, at least in the suburbs, in the sense of I do see signs for Dave McCormick in front of those nicer houses in Radnor Township. So those Republican voters who were lost in recent cycles, for example, maybe they'll pull the lever from McCormick in this one. He's also well established here. I mean, his father was chairman of the state system of higher education in Pennsylvania, and was a Dick Thornburg appointee. He was Republican governor in the 80s. So it's not an unrecognized name among Republican circles. It's quite well known. And yeah, your analogy would be correct.
Okay. All right. So next, I'm going to go to Trump's endorsement, Dr. Oz, or as David McCormick never ceases to tell voters, Mehmet Oz. Got to throw in the Turkish first name. And Dr. Oz is, I like to think of him kind of as MAGA's Jeb Bush. Like, he's got everything going for him on paper, but anytime you sort of look in on his campaign, it's just not doing it.
Well, McCormick is running far more of a robust on the ground campaign. So McCormick is really campaigning hard. And I thought there was this recent Bloomberg Business Week profile of McCormick about his comeback at Bridgewater and how he fought his way back to be in the good graces of Ray Dalio, and just what a hard worker he really is to accomplish what he wants to get done. And I would say McCormick is definitely the guy who really wants to win. And he's working hard to do that by navigating the choppy waters that define all the culturally fractious regions of Pennsylvania. Dr. Oz, he's definitely trying to embrace a 16 message in the sense of that message of 16 in the sense of elevating voters, making them feel good, kind of following that daytime syndication type persona. And, there does appear to be, though, this acute sense of cynicism among plenty of voters in Pennsylvania who aren't necessarily buying Oz's message. So again, your analogy, I would say, isn't that far off, but I think there are far more Oz voters than people realize. They're just like in 16 suburban voters who are embarrassed to admit it.
Okay, so we need to spend a lot of time talking about that, Charles. But before we do that, I want to introduce one other candidate. And I think you know exactly the name that's on my lips right now. Should I say it, or do you want to finish the sentence for me?
Go for it.
Kathy Barnette. And I'm going to get canceled for saying this, but as a Californian, she reminds me like a lot of like a Larry Elder, like a charismatic Black Republican in media who kind of comes out of nowhere, gives the libs a taste of their own medicine. And now like the whole field has kind of been caught off guard, and maybe it's her race to lose. I don't know. What do you think?
No, Larry Elder, definitely more moderate guy. So I think, Kathy Barnette is really playing for the more rural evangelical type voter across Pennsylvania. And there's a bounty of those voters. And that's what makes her a formidable candidate. And I think she was always somewhat of a dark horse. She ran for Congress in 20 in suburban Philadelphia, lost, but definitely far more competitive and could really prove disruptive in terms of the outcome of the race for either McCormick or Oz.
Okay. All right. So did I forget anyone? Like, is Carla Stan still in this? Is Jeff Bartos? Pratik talking? What's going on?
No, I was just going to say, I was wondering if you think it in fact is a 3-person race, or if there's still time for Bartos or Sands to break out.
Too late for Bartos or Sands. Bartos had the right message. He ran for in 18 with Scott Wagner. He was lieutenant governor candidate that year, ran with Wagner against Wolf. That proved to be, candidly, a disastrous campaign. They handily lost to Wolf. But that was no fault of Bartos. That was really Wagner. Bartos is definitely a more middle of the road type guy, but he's not going to pull through. Carla Sands, she's making a play for suburban areas, especially like ex-urban areas, but no chance. It's really down to Oz and McCormick and how much Barnette can hurt the margins for either candidate.
So am I hearing that you don't regard Barnette as, in fact, being in contention to win it? It's more a question of, like, if she can get second or third?
Well, look what happened at Kentucky Derby. So I think in that sense, upsets do happen. But I still think when you consider the number of undecided voters, I think those voters are really choosing between either McCormick or Oz. The problem for all these Republican candidates and the conversations that I have repeatedly with voters throughout the state is just the brutal reality that most voters that I talk to don't like any of the candidates, and they really don't know what they're going to do. But those voters, when they're talking about the race, it's really down to Oz or McCormick.
So I like to ask chippy and stupid questions and let you sound smart, but maybe we should just go to the heart of the matter. Pennsylvania is a huge state. Its cultures, subcultures range from basically New York City and the suburbs of Philadelphia to Appalachia and its own version of Middle America. And this, what is there a regional divide? How do you even begin to understand a race this complicated and this fractured? Where do you even start?
Right, so complicated. You nailed it in the sense of its extremely fragmented state. So, let's look at suburban Philadelphia. That is playing the pivotal. The population of suburban Philadelphia now surpasses that of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh City combined. So it's a massive area. But I also think you have to factor the Lehigh Valley into suburban Philadelphia now. The Lehigh Valley is a population economic powerhouse. That's the extension of Metro New York, more so than Greater Philadelphia. Philadelphia still has its own ecosystem, massive media market. But when you go beyond that, you go into northeastern Pennsylvania, which is a combination of rural declining coal areas mixed with smaller cities that, again, are demographically an extension of, let's say, North Jersey. South central Pennsylvania, Harrisburg and Lancaster and York. That area is another economic powerhouse, and long term, I think, will be more reflective of the voter dynamics that you'll see in Northern Virginia, for example. It's the most prosperous area of the state outside of suburban Philadelphia. And then you have this vast Western Pennsylvania where there is continued and persistent population decline, including in Pittsburgh. And that's where a lot of the candidates, at least on the Republican side for Senate, they're going hard for those voters because they're the most energized. And ironically, until recent memory, they were trending Democratic in their votes, but that's no longer the case.
But like, is there like a little skeleton key to this, though? I mean, it sounds like you seem to favor the thesis that turning out voters in the, I don't know, within an hour of Philadelphia is probably what will win this election, as opposed to sort of motivating former Democrats in Appalachia.
I mean, the West is lost for the Democratic Party. So there are 48 rural counties in Pennsylvania. And those 48 rural counties, many of them were Democrat through the Obama era. They're the ones, of course, that went from Obama to Trump. So yes, if you're looking in terms of a competitive electoral market in Pennsylvania, I would argue that it is the Lehigh Valley, Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton. It's vast suburbia. It's a reflection of everything. It really is the microcosm in the sense of you have middle of the road voters. Northampton County, for example, in the Lehigh Valley, that went for Trump in 2016 and then barely went for Biden in 2020. We're talking not even 2,000 votes for Biden.
Right. That's where they stole the election, right?
No, it's where Biden won. I mean, because it's just.
I'm kidding.
I mean, but what's lost in that argument, though, Alex?
Yeah.
This is a state where school districts are the primary employer in so many areas of the state. The school district dictates economic life, social life. And if you look closely at the voting results from 2020, I mean, Biden, that's a constituency that he courted his whole career. And those teachers, man, they just went for Biden.
I want to go back to Kathy Barnette and press you a little bit. Number one, where in your review, is she currently drawing support from? And then number two, what is the evidence that undecided voters are not generally considering her? And I ask only because she's seen quite a surge over just the last few days, and the markets now have her at about a 35% chance of winning.
Her surge is driven by her recent debate, where she had this very moving, powerful talk about her, abortion. And of course, that was fortuitous for her because, of course, the Roe v. Wade debate really emerged during that recent debate. In terms of where she would be competitive, I would think it would be in places like Lebanon County. So Lebanon County is in South Central Pennsylvania, rural, very Pennsylvania Dutch. Fort Indiantown Gap is a major military base there. The primary employer in that region. They're conservative voters who trend evangelical or even devoutly Protestant, let's say Lutheran, for example. Her social conservative message would resonate in a place like Lebanon County or Berks County. But I don't know how competitive she would be, let's say, in greater Philadelphia. So I still think even though there's a large number of undecided voters, she would be a disruptive force in terms of skewing the results. But I still don't think she would ultimately pull it through.
I mean, let me package it a different way. Actually, I've got a lot of ways I want to package this and see what you tell me. But California, as California goes, so goes the nation. And California has a lot of sophisticated Republicans down in, Orange County, Newport Beach, just the same as Pennsylvania does down out the main line and whatever. It's also got a lot of rural Republicans. And it just seemed like watching that recall that there was just an agreement among California Republicans that they were going to own the libs by nominating a Black Republican, and that by itself was its own goal. And I just don't know if that's like a west to east trend, like if that's like a cultural trend that, might catch fire in Philadelphia, or if it's like, Skechers, where they're just never going to be cool east of the Rockies.
It's an interesting anecdote. Let's put it this way. So what could help her cause? She's backed by Doug Mastriano. All right. So that's the state senator who's running for governor in the Republican primary, and all polling indicates consistently that he's a frontrunner. And I will tell you that the yard signs across Pennsylvania seem to tell the story. I drive all over the state, and I'm struck by the number of Mastriano campaign signs, even in greater Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to 2016 in the sense of all the evidence was there that people were going for Trump. You didn't hear them, but they showed up to the polls and went for Trump. That appears to be the case for Mastriano. So there is a scenario where Barnette would benefit from all those people that all polling indicates are going to the polls on the 17th of May and voting for Mastriano. They could in turn vote for Barnette in the Senate primary.
To follow up on that, I wanted to ask the flip side, I guess, of Keen's question, which is one of the arguments that Barnette is laying out, and I think she's getting a lot of traction for, is the claim that she can bring new people to the polls, people who don't typically vote in Republican primaries. Maybe that includes African Americans. She's also talked about other constituencies. Do you think that there's enough of an ingredient of an upset here where maybe people are modeling off of a typical Republican primary, but with a candidate like Barnette, she could bring in a lot of new people?
I don't know if I buy that in Pennsylvania, because I think when it comes to minority voters in the state, they are consistently voting Democratic, and they will continue to do so. I mean, we've had this demographic transformation, especially, let's say, east of the Susquehanna River in the past 20 years. For context, I mean, just since 2010, as U.S. Census numbers show, a large number of small and mid-sized cities in eastern Pennsylvania now have Hispanic majority population. So that would include Allentown, Hazleton, Reading. I mean, Hazleton, for example, has a 70% Hispanic population now.
Wow.
Reading is 85% Hispanic. I mean, Alex, it's amazing. In 2000, Hazleton had less than a 1% Hispanic population, and now it's 70%. So you have these communities in eastern Pennsylvania, the Northeast, the coal region.
I mean, you're basically telling me like Billy Joel and Amish country are no longer synonymous with Billy Joel and Amish people. That's like now taco and tamale central.
Well, that Billy Joel song got Allentown won then. I mean, like there has been this enduring misperception about, let's say, Pennsylvania Dutch country. I mean, Lancaster County, for example, Amish country. Lancaster City is
something different.
Hispanic majority. Yeah, I mean, so these are Hispanic cities, and even though Trump may have enjoyed relative gains there in 2020 compared to 2016, this isn't the Texas southern, those southern counties of Texas. I mean, these are second to third generation U.S. citizens. They grew up in New York City, Metro New York. They moved to Lancaster, Reading, wherever in Pennsylvania in the 80s or 90s. They have voted Democrat, and they'll continue to vote Democrat. And then, of course, in the city of Philadelphia, you're not changing that either. So I really don't. Could there be a somewhat of a level of improvement? Of course. But I think Pennsylvania, and that when it comes to that GOP argument about winning back or winning over Hispanic voters, let's say comparable to the 2004 cycle, I don't know if that necessarily works in Pennsylvania.
Well, so maybe here's the worst nightmare for bettors, I think, is they're probably looking at the field and saying, well, Dr. Oz is the MAGA candidate, and now David McCormick and Kathy Barnette have to figure out their own lane. But I just wonder, you were saying there's a lot more support than Oz than YouTube and the TV news says. But like, is it the other way around where Dr. Oz and David McCormick are not, neither of them are verifiably MAGA? Maybe on paper Oz is, and Kathy Barnette kind of has the open lane to win over the sort of hardcore Trump vote, that basically Oz just can't close the deal, and now the lane's open for Kathy Barnette to steal all those Trump votes from him?
Well, I think Barnett's greatest selling point at this juncture in the campaign is her authenticity. And that's what's making her a formidable contender at this point. Voters are saying, I don't like any of them, but man, I just watched that powerful monologue she gave at the recent US Senate debate. There's something there, I'm drawn to it, and maybe that's who I go for. So yeah, I mean, the MAGA credentials when it comes to Oz or McCormick could come into play. For Oz, of course, it's the tape, right? All the tapes, from the syndicated show, that what he has said in recent memory conflicts with what he's saying now. When it comes to McCormick, I think the issue is, and Trump hit on this at his recent rally in Western Pennsylvania, when he talked about how Bush was the worst president of his lifetime. And McCormick did work for Bush. And it should not be forgotten, Pennsylvania in many ways is home to the anti-Bush working class voter. It was here where you still have people who love Trump, people who since 2016 have changed their registration from Democrat to Republican. They still consider the Bush presidency the beginning of the end for their communities, for what they harbor deep resentment for that era. And it's really only since 2020 that they have translated their allegiance to Trump into loyalty in terms of the Republican Party. Even in 2016, that wasn't a vote for the GOP. They were just going for Trump. So it should not be lost. I mean, that the Bush era, the memories of that, still linger in working class communities throughout Western and Northeastern Pennsylvania.
But I mean, have you seen Dr. Oz? I'm sure you've seen Dr. Oz give more stump speeches than I have. I've just seen the ones on YouTube. And to me, the best retail politics candidate here is probably Kathy Barnette. The second best to me is David McCormick. And then when I see Oz with constituents and voters, I'm like, this dude is great on TV, but he is not good at talking to voters. I've been very skeptical just watching him lately. Pratik kind of put me on this, but I don't know. I mean, I want to hear where these Oz voters are, because I believe you, but where are they hiding?
Yeah, and just to build on that, so maybe it would be helpful if you can tell us who are the loyal Oz voters, who are the people who are the shy Oz voters, and then who are the people telling pollsters that they're going to vote for Oz but may be open to another candidate.
I think the open Oz voters would just be in those working class regions, especially in Western Pennsylvania, where Oz has campaigned very hard. As far as shy Oz voters go, I think that's in upper middle class suburbia. Attorney stalkers who they're embarrassed to admit it, but they're pulling for the guy. They're saying, why not? And then as far as the undecideds go, I mean, voters who are telling pollers Oz, but maybe open to another. I mean, that's scattered throughout the state. I mean, I think when it comes to Oz versus, let's say, Barnette, where there's competitive territory, it is in that historically Pennsylvania Dutch country, culturally historic area in the sense of Berks, Lebanon County, South Central Pennsylvania. I can see Barnette performing quite well, and that's almost like York County, for example, going into the Maryland border. That's like the Bible Belt of Pennsylvania, and a large evangelical base. And I can see Barnette performing quite well there compared to Oz.
So in other words, you're saying that the crossover, like the number of voters who are either Oz or Barnette is more than voters who may be between Oz and McCormick?
I think so. I think McCormick has his own base, especially in Northeastern Pennsylvania, where he is a recognized name, especially among established Republican circles there, but also in greater Philadelphia.
I mean, to me, that's sometimes the answer to the question is like who's stealing votes from who. And if I could only figure out who Kathy Barnette is stealing votes from, I feel like I could tell you who's going to win this election. But I don't know the answer to that. I kind of hoped you did.
Well, and so on that theme, what would you say is if you look at the Trafalgar poll, for example, which is what is driving a lot of the betting action right now, Bartos and Sands are combined. I mean, I'll have to check, but I think they're combining like 13% or something of the vote. So what do you think happens with that constituency? Like, do you think there's a chance either Bartos or Sands may endorse someone else, or if not, where do those voters go on election day?
I don't think Sands, I mean, I'm just projecting here, but I don't think Sands would endorse anyone. There could be a scenario where Bartos does get out, but my sense would be Bartos would go for Oz over McCormick. I mean, Bartos has Bartos has been a critic of both candidates. His argument is they're all carpetbaggers. I'm the guy who's authentically Pennsylvanian. And
I mean, he's not wrong.
No, but he is wrong in the sense of this is a state that rewards carpetbaggers. All right, so Pat Toomey, the seat that they're fighting for, Pat Toomey from Rhode Island. I mean, we could go back. I mean, even John Hines, who to this day is the most popular, but most successful candidate in Pennsylvania history. When he won for re-election for U.S. Senate in '88, it was by what remains the highest winning margin in state history. And he grew up in San Francisco in spite of having that iconic name. So this is Arlen Specter, Russell, Kansas, same town as Dole.
Yeah.
So Pennsylvania is quite transient. I mean, they're very open to out-of-state voters. And I never bought the argument that Oz living in New Jersey, just across from Manhattan, would prove a liability, or the fact that McCormick had been away for 15 years and living in Connecticut. This is a state, I mean, it's a transient enough state, I should say, that would not necessarily bother voters. So, but Bartos' argument, the polling indicates, he's not going anywhere, but that argument, I don't think it helped his cause.
Let me ask you, and I regret that I even have to ask this question, but I think I do. I mean, if you're correct in the profile you're painting of the people who are enthusiastic about Oz, or at least open to him, are they concerned or triggered by the fact that he's Muslim, that he has the whole Turkey connection? And if not, why not? Are they even aware of it, or they just kind of don't care?
I don't think they're reading deeply. For example, I don't think they were reading the ABC News recent report about how Dr. Oz leases a building in Turkey to the Turkish government, their Department of Education. I mean, it's a strange story, right?
Right.
So,
or how David McCormick always subtly just says, "Oh, Mehmet Oz," just every time just drops that Turkish dog whistle in.
Right. It's clearly a play that they're going for, but look, this is too culturally diverse of a state for that. I don't think that's on people's minds. I mean, Obama won Pennsylvania thanks to rural, post-industrial, white working class areas. They loved Obama. They found hope in Obama. I mean, so that play does not work. Pennsylvania is far more cosmopolitan in that sense. That's yet another misperception, and I don't think it would be an issue.
I've been on both sides of betting on Oz. Early on, I went long on Oz. I thought the markets were underestimating him vis-a-vis McCormick, but I changed my view on Oz. This is now at least a few weeks ago, but one of the things that we all knew was coming down the pike with Oz is the question of his Turkish citizenship and what he would do about that. And then, not surprisingly, he ended up getting a question from a reporter. And I thought for sure, especially a guy trained to be on TV, already would have had an answer prepared. But he didn't. He fumbled, and he said he wouldn't renounce his Turkish citizenship. And then there was a bad press cycle, and then he announced that he would. And what that told me was not necessarily that that episode would hurt him, but that it may speak to his lack of a skill as a candidate. So how would you respond? What is your sense of who's just running a good campaign, who has a good ground game, who really is just going to close out with a strong message versus who is open to gaffes and liabilities? How would you rate Oz there? And then what would you also say about the other candidates in that respect?
Yeah, so I think McCormick wins the disciplined campaign. It's been well organized. He's campaigned hard. He's gone everywhere. Even where I am in Wayne, he was campaigning at the Manila's Diner here a few weeks ago. Oz, as Alex noted earlier, great on TV. He could go on Hannity and, he could reach that suburban boomer demographic via Hannity at 9 in the Philadelphia suburbs. But it has been somewhat of a lackluster campaign on the ground. It is surprising in that sense. He's campaigned hard in certain areas, but McCormick is definitely running the best organized campaign, the most disciplined one. And if he wins on the 17th, it will be because of that path that he took.
Does Pennsylvania reward retail politics? I know every state's different, but is it a retail politics state?
I don't think it is. Again, the fact, and look, it was a long time ago at this point, but the fact that working class voters, Democrats at that time in Western Pennsylvania, just voted in legions for John Hines, who was the ultimate patrician.
Yeah.
This guy is as disconnected from blue collar voters as it gets, who collects 13th century Flemish art, which is what he did. That was his hobby. But he was beloved among the working class. So no, I think Pennsylvania voters, they're true centrists. They're often mercurial, and they're not necessarily going to reward retail politics. I think they reward just the normal mainstream candidate who proves unthreatening, who seems sensible, and who will just leave them alone. So that creates, on the Senate side, that creates the advantage for any of the Republican candidates against John Fetterman. But then on the gubernatorial side, it creates this opening for Josh Shapiro, who is running this, yet another very disciplined campaign as a centrist, who can win over voters even beyond the suburbs. And that was reflected by his victories for Attorney General in 2016 and 2020.
You make Pennsylvania sound like a really great place.
One of the things that, if you look at the market on Kathy Barnette, it's been very interesting how the markets have reacted, because one of the things I pointed out on this podcast and I was confused by is early on, she was trading around 1-2% in the markets, even though even early on, the polls were registering support for her, sometimes even double-digit support. And then just in the last couple of days, she has really surged, now trading at 34 or 35%. I bought her in the teens and I kind of sold it in the 20s, which was premature. But the big fear that I have about Barnette is that she's had these great moments on TV. She's telegenic and all that. But I'm thinking there has to be some opposition file on her somewhere. And in the closing days of the campaign, as Oz and McCormick realize she's a serious threat, their campaigns and then outside groups, I have to think, are going to go on the attack. What should we expect in terms of negative ads and campaigning against Barnette, and how bad will it be?
If there's any opposition file, the jam for Republicans, the opposition file would be her 2020 congressional race in suburban Philadelphia, where she ran against Madeline Dean, got clobbered. She was the sole candidate for the primary. It was an embarrassing campaign. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran a lengthy story about how She didn't accept her loss in the 2020 election. So the jam for the Republican Party is, I mean, then you're rehashing 2020. And really the Barnette voter, I think, you know, the fact that she was endorsed by or is supported by Dono, another guy who isn't getting over 2020, the fact that they're together, they're targeting that same voter, right? The voter where the November 2020 never ended. It's an enduring memory. And look, if she pulls through in November, it could be a very bad scenario for the Republican Party in the sense of I think people underestimate John Fetterman. The power of John Fetterman is he does go into rural parts of Pennsylvania. He does he does not insult Trump voters. He tries to talk to working class voters in those regions. So like the counties that went for Bernie Sanders against Hillary in 2016, for example, that's what he's targeting. And in spite of Fetterman's persona, he would still dominate in the suburbs if the scenario is Barnette versus Fetterman. But the Oppo file, the problem, again, the problem for the Republican Party is the Oppo files are 2020 race, but so many primary voters are voting with 2020 in mind.
I have to say, I mean, what you just said there actually makes me more inclined to take, think about betting on Barnette. I don't know if I would do it at the current price, but the point is that my fear, I mean, if the worst thing about her is about the 2020 campaign, I mean, okay, she's decrying voter fraud. Great. I mean, that's basically the Republican line at this point. My fear would be that that she might be like a Christine O'Donnell kind of a situation, someone that just kind of comes out of nowhere and then all of a sudden you just realize what a disaster is. But if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like the likelihood of a total meltdown is probably relatively low, given that she was vetted in 2020.
I don't know how vetted she was in 2020. I mean, look, the problem with the Republican Party in Pennsylvania and the fact that in this red wave year, we could be looking at blue outcomes in November in Pennsylvania is the fact that the Republican Party in recent cycles has just been so disorganized. They really do face this institutional crisis. And it goes back really to 2015 when they lost 3 state Supreme Court races that changed the political composition of that court. And that court has played an immeasurable role in so many things, whether it is election reform debates or COVID policies at the state level. And Trump really won in spite of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania. I mean, it's the same old story. He won the Obama voters in Pennsylvania, and that carried him over. The Obama voters working class areas, and that carried him over the top. So really, I mean, no matter what happens, whether it's the gubernatorial primary or the Senate, there just needs to be, I'm sure the Republican Party says there needs to be a reckoning and reflection here about what they did wrong and to reevaluate just the organizational structure of that party.
Well, here's what I think should worry you. Pratik, I'll take the other side of this argument. Here's what should worry you about Kathy Barnette. Her last FEC filing at the end of April said she had like $200,000 in the bank. That is not a lot of money to close out a race in a state as big as Pennsylvania. So if her opponents do have anything on her in that Oppo file, which I guarantee you they do because this is politics and it's 2022 and it's kind of low down and dirty, what does she have left to respond with? I mean, like you can't viral video your way through, a real hatchet job if there's something to it. So to me, at this stage, with a week left on the game clock, that's the issue. Where's the money going to come from?
I guess my response to that would be that it seems to me like it seems like the opportunity, I mean, the reason why I'm taking Barnette seriously, the reason I think there's an opportunity is because when you look at the favorability versus the unfavorability, I think that is kind of the Achilles heel for the other two candidates. So Oz has always had very high unfavorables, and there's probably some cap on what he can get. With McCormick, I mean, his favorable versus unfavorable tended to look pretty good throughout the cycle. But now that Trump is coming out swinging against him, I think that you probably have to consider that that's going to be a deal breaker for a certain percentage of Republicans. Now, it's entirely possible that Trump is going to come out and attack Barnette, but I don't think he will. I mean, I'm inclined to think he's going to just keep his powder dry there. And so the question is, yes, I mean, there will be attack ads, but the question is, will that fundamentally impact your favorable versus unfavorable? And I don't know. I mean, I would be interested, Charles, if you have a thought on that.
I mean, we're a week out, so I don't know how much that would factor in. I mean, yeah, there will be Oppo commercials. I'm sure just going through Barnett's old tweets, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
But I still believe that this comes down to McCormick or Oz. I mean, it really would be one of the more dramatic comeback stories in recent electoral memory for Barnette to pull this off. So, because Barnette would be, in many ways, the Christine O'Donnell of this cycle. She would. I mean, and I think Pennsylvania could be that whole the problem of the cycle for the Republican Party. I mean, a consequential state that is up for grabs could easily go Republican. You could hit Democrats here in their vulnerable spots, but they just didn't deliver.
All right. Well, then let's try this. Okay. So what you're telling me is that you are not a Kathy Barnette believer, and that's fine. I have no quarrel with that. I think this is a tough race to call. So I've still got on the table, I've got David McCormick and I've got Mehmet Oz. And maybe I was thinking I would just lend you like 1,000 Keen Dog bucks here. So, they're in the mail. I'll just, text you, I'll Venmo you a couple Keen Dog bucks. And right now your choices are to bet on David McCormick, basically as a 5-1 long shot. He's trading at 20 cents a share, 19 cents a share right now. Or Dr. Oz at a 2-1, basically. So he's trading at 52 cents a share right now. So I know that my Keen Dog bucks probably aren't quite in your bank account yet, but what do you think you would do with those? Do you think you would take Dr. Oz at 2-1 or David McCormick, 20% underdog there?
1 week out, probably Oz.
Yeah.
Just because of greater Philadelphia, South Central Pennsylvania, especially the Harrisburg area. Again, I think Oz's quiet base, just based on lots of conversations I'm having just with voters across the state, his quiet base is actually upper middle class, comprised of upper middle class suburban voters.
What do they say when you have that conversation? Like, what is it about him that registers?
Same thing they said in 2016 about Trump. They just like him. They like that. He has an elevating persona. What do we have to lose? They just like the guy. And and I just think it's a replay 16. 2020 is a different story. I mean, many of those voters thought Trump did deserve to lose. Even if they did vote for him, they were so angry over, let's say, Trump's first debate performance, for example, that they kind of just gave up. And but in this case, I think there are more people who behind closed doors like Oz than people realize.
So you're saying he's a deal around 50%. How high would you pay for him?
Well, I'm not going to get into that. I mean, I would say I would just, my prediction, a week out, it's neck and neck McCormick Oz. And if the election were held today, a week out, I think Oz barely gets through. But and if McCormick were to pull it off, it's just because he ran the best campaign. Yeah,
a better campaign by a weaker candidate versus what seems on the ground to be a stronger candidate running a weaker campaign, and reach your own conclusions, right?
Liked among people who encounter him. I mean, he's respected, he's liked. He's working his head off. So, if McCormick pulls this off, it's because of the hard work that of this campaign.
All right. Well, I feel like we could talk about this from now until election day, but maybe the wise thing to do at this point is just digest what Charles has just told us, because it is a lot. I do think it would be something. Actually, here's something really important. I think all the boys listening to this need to Google your name, Charles McElwee. And didn't you write an essay about what's his name, Hines? That you were talking about, the old senator, like how his death was like one of the largest events in U.S. politics that people have forgotten about, and how much politics was changed by his death. Was that you?
Yeah, it was. I wrote that for RealClear Politics in April 2021. And yeah, it was the game changer, you can argue, from 1991 onward. It's his death in Lower Merion Township, which is just minutes from where I am, his tragic crash.
I think that was one of my favorite reads of like the last couple of years, just because it was a person I had never heard of, an event that I was unfamiliar with. And then once you laid out what happened in the chain of events after, I was like, oh my God, he's right. Like this thing that's never been in my mind. Like it had its fingerprints over the rest of history. So
Area 04.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll cap it there. But Charles, hopefully we haven't creeped you out so much that you won't come back again. But we really enjoyed this.
It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess it's goodbye for now. Pratik, I'll give you guys the last word.
One very quick question. 1 week out, what, if anything, should we be looking for to change our minds?
I think you need to look closely at, of course, the lobbing of grenades in the days ahead. I mean, this is going to be a huge fight. What's the most effective strategy? Twitter, of course, is always a poor reflection. So skip Twitter. I'd say pay attention to, what I'm doing just in my curation at RealClear Pennsylvania is I'm paying attention to those local news markets, like in Northeastern Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, outlets like, let's say WNEP 16, massive ABC affiliate that covers Central and Northeastern Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh region. Really pay close attention to 3 areas. I'd say Northeastern Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, and the Lehigh Valley. Just study those local stories, which is what I do and what I do in my writing. It has always proven to be most fruitful in my predictions. And that's my recommendation in the days ahead.
From your lips to God's ears. Thank you, Charles McElwee.
Thank you.
All right, boys, we'll see you on election day. Thanks for joining.